Hello there. I am a national and international journalist and broadcaster who spent over 3 decades reporting on worldly injustices, primarily in the mainstream media. During my time inside legacy media, I've gained a significant insight into the processes and people involved, and I felt that there was a gap in the market to talk about the gatekeepers in media. By this, I mean the main faces on the media product, or as they are called in the business, the talent. People who play a role in facilitating certain information while denying the existence of other information. I cannot underestimate the damage done by gatekeepers to our world. They maintain the status quo that benefits the few and not the majority. They push harmful agendas. They prop up the establishment. And corporate gatekeepers, like today's subject, do a great deal of harm against the people, and all in the name of protecting us. Jeremy Vine, a British broadcaster, was my first gatekeeper, and you can find that on my channel. And I had intended to make journalist Piers Morgan my second gatekeeper. However, this young woman keeps consistently popping up, and given she is broadcasting in the US and on the giant BBC network, her current reach is substantially more than Piers Morgan, and I thought that we should go with her next. She is Marianna Spring, the BBC's first ever disinformation reporter. And boy, is there a lot to say about sweet Marianna. For one so young, she's still only 27. Miss Marianna Spring has been given a huge amount of responsibility. Let's look at how she describes her role herself.
And it's a very long title as well. It's Specialist Disinformation and Social Media Reporter. And essentially what that means is that I investigate usually the real world impact of online disinformation, conspiracies, trolling.
So her main role is the BBC's disinfo reporter, whose brief is not only to tackle online misinfo, but she is also now very much involved with the BBC's new fact-checking service, BBC Verify, which involves a team of some 60 journalists. And this clip, which was before BBC Verify was launched, more about which later, tells you in her own words the reach and expanse of her role.
I think what's crucial is all about how I frame my reporting and how our team do. So I work with a brilliant team at the BBC, our disinformation team, that's made up of experts with different skills. So we have Reality Check, and they do great fact checking, both about what's online and offline. We have BBC Monitoring, who analyse what's being shared, who track the spread of disinformation, where it's coming from, how widely it's being shared. And we have BBC Trending that investigate the dark underbelly of the internet. And I effectively straddle all of those teams.
Now, that's a lot of responsibility and progress in a short time for a girl, apparently from nowhere. She hasn't had a chance to work her way up, and to an experienced journalist like myself, it's clear that she's been placed there, and that precisely is why she came to my attention in the first place. I was aware that she had authored several damning pieces demonising people who had been publicly questioning the C19 narrative. What I didn't know at that point was what an intriguing figure young Mariana would turn out to be. Now, the reason I've dubbed her Miss Nice of media propaganda is simple. She is. On the surface, to the naked eye, but delve deeper and you realise she's really Miss Nasty, but that wouldn't hook people into her particular brand of potent propaganda. Nasty doesn't sell for the role her handlers need her for, so she presents herself as a good old home counties girl, kind of like the type who does horse gymkhana, basket weaving or flower arranging at the weekend, or such similar hobbies. But the reality is, Miss Marianna Spring, as her work has so far shown, is that she is out to destroy people, you, your livelihood, and your reputation, should you be questioning official narratives. So let's look at her history, or at least that which is still visible. She was head girl at Sutton High School. The motto is with courage, with truth, with joy. And the school philosophy is a girl who's fiercely independent, is a girl who believes in herself and inspires others with that belief. A girl who's ready to discover what she wants and then goes to get it. So she was head girl at Sutton. She was chosen not only to be the ball girl at the famous annual Wimbledon tennis event, but to give flowers to Queen Elizabeth II. Both of these extremely coveted roles for teenagers, and some insiders I've talked with believe that her path to present day began back then, right then, handing those flowers to the Queen, being head girl at Sutton School, being chosen as a ball girl at Wimbledon. Let's be clear. Sonia Poulton never got picked to present flowers to royals, and I grew up in Gloucestershire, where royals are everywhere, pillaging the land, polluting it and diddling the locals. They're literally everywhere, and I've never, ever been asked to present flowers to the Queen. Not that I would, but it's a certain type who gets asked to do that sort of role. You know it as well as I do. Mariana was born in 1996, and according to Wikipedia, she displayed an interest in journalism at the age of 8. Of course she did. At school, she was involved in a young journalism program. She studied French and Russian at university and wrote for the student newspaper Cherwell. She spent a year in Russia, contributing news articles to the Moscow Times. She undertook work experience at The Guardian and Private Eye. Now, the official story is that Marianna Spring entered the BBC via referral from a Guardian journalist to then BBC Newsnight presenter Emily Maitlis. Are we actually expected to believe that a junior journalist who didn't know the BBC contact was suddenly brought in by one of the Beeb's major talents? What about all those other trainee journalists who are known to bombard news outlets looking for their way in? What was it that set young Marianna Spring apart? We know it's not talent. We've seen that, because while she is a decently basic reporter, she is not brilliant or outstanding in any respect. So perhaps it was something else that made the role tailor-made for her. Generally, you can trace the trajectory of a journalist. Anyone can see mine online: local newspaper, music journalism, and then into social commentary and investigative journalism. Fairly common route for many journalists, but Mariana seemed to skip the basics of training on the job. At the start of 2020, she was appointed as the BBC's first specialist disinformation and social media reporter. Of course, it was also at the start of C19. There are no coincidences here. Then there's all the various acknowledgements that this inexperienced young woman appears to have achieved in such a short period of time. She was named Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2021, barely a year after she had acquired her disinformation role. She won an Innovation Award to do with Newsnight reporting, was nominated as Young Talent of the Year at the Royal Television Society's Journalism Awards in 2023, and even gave a journalism masterclass. Oh, how I laughed. And in the You Can't Make This Up category, she is even a judge for the 2023 Orwell Prize. So what is the theme for this year? This is where it gets better. The theme is who's in control. You might be thinking at this stage that she comes from a showbiz family, that she's where she is because of nepotism. Alas, no. She once tweeted this about her parents. My mum was a nurse for years, dad a window cleaner and park keeper, then worked for BT and did his A-levels in the evening to go to medical school. First day there, another student said, God, they've let in a window cleaner who didn't finish school. Dad came top of the year. This tweet was sent to another BBC colleague, Clive Myrie. It was in response to the then Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries, making a comment about how people at the BBC are from very affluent backgrounds, etc., etc. But certainly Mariana's background was affluent enough for her to be sent to Sutton High School. She was thoroughly middle class, who went to Sutton High School, which today works out roughly £20,000 a year that parents have to cough up. And that's just for the school, not the very middle class things that you're expected to do when you attend schools like Sutton High School, such as overseas trips and all of the equipment you need for the thoroughly middle class sporting events that you will take part in. Maybe she had a scholarship. Difficult to tell, because there's a very sanitized version of Miss Spring online, almost as if there's a specific narrative that has been laid down just specially for her. Now, when it comes to being a good propagandist for the BBC, it's important that the intended viewers are able to relate to the propagandist. Her area being the internet, she needs to be young enough to catch the BBC youth audience while earning the trust of the thoroughly Middle England Middle Agers who still think BBC News is a trustworthy source. Try not to laugh there. Which may explain why Marianna often looks as if she's been dressed as a 70-year-old. She looks nothing like the 25, 26, 27-year-old that she's been in the public eye. I mean, who told Mariana to go to an awards ceremony dressed up as a Tudor wife? Now, on a less superficial note, but with propagandist overall images important, what she had to say at the event made me nervous.
It's so important that we investigate the social media worlds that we all live in, and actually it's impossible to separate them from what goes on day to day. And I think that will become just a really important part of all the journalism that we do going forwards. And I hope that projects like this we can build on to investigate those subjective social media worlds more in the future.
She talks about investigating more online in the future, her comments about social media being particularly gruesome and with a sense of foreboding. Then there's her spiel that she comes out with about this being the human cost of conspiracy theories. So as we know, she loves to describe her job as if she's somebody who's coming to the rescue of these poor people who have suffered from questions being asked. But what about the human cost of a Mariana spring? Can we even calculate that, given her endless pushing of experimental jabs and the totalitarian lockdown? She says her job is to counter the online conspiracies that create real life harmful impact. But BBC won't look at its own misinformation, and it is legendary. In the last 10 years, the BBC have become even more government-centred than they have in the last few decades. They've lied about the political destruction of the NHS. They've lied about the poverty in the UK. They lied about C19 and all aspects of it. And to top it off, they are part absolutely of the gender cult, and they routinely depict male attackers as females. So it is not an organisation to be trusted with telling the truth. I will give you one example of my personal experience of misinformation. And I took it to the top of the misinformation department, to Mariana's boss himself, Mike Wendling. It was coming up to the 25th anniversary of the Spice Girls. I was involved in the creation of their nicknames, and I talk about that on another video on my YouTube channel. So please check that out. Obviously not right now. I'd like you to carry on listening to this right now, but I would like you to watch that video just to sort of confirm what it is I'm saying. Anyway, BBC printed the official narrative, which happened to involve Top of the Pops magazine being crowned the real creators of the nicknames of the Spice Girls, which was not entirely the truth because I had created the beginning of them. Top of the Pops used to be a prime BBC music show before satellite music channels happened, so the BBC is invested in pushing that narrative. So I told Mike Wendling about it, and they never corrected it. But as we know, there have been other occasions when BBC have spread both mis and disinformation. The fact is, the reason intelligent people are asking questions of Mariana Spring is because her story doesn't make any sense. She is neither an experienced journalist nor a particularly worldly individual. To all intents and purposes, she's led a sheltered life in Sutton, Surrey, just down the road from me. Trust me, it's nice enough. Her appointment makes no sense unless she was appointed for a reason other than journalism. She was immediately fast-tracked as an industry expert. If you do a cursory search online about Mariana Spring, the first thing you'll notice is how many podcasts she's been involved with, right? Spouting off about how to be a journalist, which of course is hilarious. She's a junior hack at best. She's a name because the BBC made her a name and not because she worked for it. Her endless podcasts include a podcast with the Industry Bible Broadcast, a podcast with Joe, a masterclass about being a journalist, podcasts with the Hong Kong Literary Club, podcasts in America. Basically, each time she appears, it's just a repeat of all the same stuff. She is the antithesis of journalism, readily accepting government narratives and pushing Agenda 2030 sustainable development. She's more one of them than she is one of us. And here she is with our very first gatekeeper, Jeremy Vine. Well, you know what they say, shills of a feather, shield together. Actually, I just made that up, but you get my point. So let's talk about her agenda. What is her role? Here's what Darren Nesbitt, editor of The Light, thinks about that.
I mean, it couldn't be more Ministry of Truth if you tried, could it? I mean, it was, even though she denied it, it was started in March 2020. Oh, it started in January. So, okay, so you were preparing for it for a couple of months, and then they launched it. So, it came out as part of the counter narrative. She's not any journalist. She's not been a hack for 10, 20 years and seen it all and all the rest of it. Didn't like, the experienced journalists want this job. No, it's been specifically created with a specific person in mind that was, supposedly young and vulnerable and that just a really nice person. So anybody that attacks her for spreading lies, for spreading absolute outright lies and playing down, the resistance and all the rest of it, it can obviously be painted as a terrible, horrible person.
To be clear, she plays on the whole issue of youth. And don't anybody tell me that she's not been employed exactly because of that youthfulness. You know why? Because it's an effective deterrent from criticism. Some people are like, oh, she's a young journalist, don't criticize her. They've been put off of questioning her for that reason alone. Not me. It's simple. If you put yourself out there and clearly aim to destroy lives and livelihoods, then you better be prepared to be picked apart. It happens to everyone who is in the public eye, and she is no different. The psychology behind her being Miss Nice is she sounds thoroughly reasonable all the time. In her interview with Joe, she said, and I quote, "I expect to be challenged. In fact, I spend a lot of time interviewing people who believe very extreme online conspiracies because I want to understand what they believe and I want to hear what they have to say. And I want to come from a point of empathy and understanding in the reporting that I do." Excuse me while I heave. That is absolutely not what she does. Her targets are legendary. I don't believe for a second that she wants to understand these people, which is why her and her team target people with the aim of destroying their online presence and even their real world existence.
I'm investigating the UK's conspiracy theory movement. I'm trying to understand more about how it's evolved and intensified since the pandemic here in the UK. I'm looking at the alternative media that finds itself at the heart of this movement and a conspiracy theory newspaper that's a part of that as well. I'm looking at the way that alternative media is funded. I'm looking at its impact on local communities. I'm looking at its connections with far-right figures and also its foreign links. That's for a podcast series that will be coming out in June. It's called Mariana in Conspiracy Land, and it will be available on BBC Sounds, Radio 4.
Respected researcher Richard D. Hall is one of her targets. Listen to what she has to say about him and how she set out to go after him.
Since the original investigation, Hall's reach has significantly reduced. His YouTube channel, which had over 80,000 subscribers, was taken down and his store was closed.
Richard is currently being sued in civil litigation regarding the Manchester bombing. And I have it on good authority that Mariana's team were actively looking to investigate me around the same time that they were investigating Richard D. Hall. And I was told this, and I was followed by various members of their team on social media. But the reality is they struggle to be able to tar me in the same way that they can somebody like a Richard D. Hall, because I know their game very well. And that's not to suggest that Richard doesn't. But I've been alongside these people. I know how they work. I know how they set out to go after people. I know how they smear. I know how they create false narratives. So I'm always looking out for them, and I'm looking at ways to duck and dive them, right? So I can continue spreading the truth. Mariana Spring and her team have been hell-bent on censoring the internet and proudly boast about contacting platforms, including TikTok, and having accounts removed. Since when has this been the domain of the BBC? However, it is very much the domain of government, who are trying and intending to push through their Online Harms Act. The aim, of course, of online harms is to censor what you have to say on social media. And somebody like Mariana Spring is the most beautiful puppet to be able to help this happen. You know, it isn't just Richard D. Hall that they targeted, but Dan Penner, a business coach with thousands of followers on social media. Mariana and her team didn't like him because he has questioned the climate narrative. So what did they do? They went after him to destroy his online presence. This is sinister at best. And look at some of the people she interviews. You only get to talk to a Fauci if you are not going to challenge him. The reason why a Mariana Spring gets to interview an Anthony Fauci is precisely because of the ineffectiveness of her questions. This interview in particular, her approach is all about how does he cope with people disagreeing with him. She doesn't question his influence. She doesn't question his actions, right? She takes them for granted as being a good thing and turns him into a victim. He's a hero who is also a victim. And that is really the premise of what she is all about. It's about going after people who are asking reasonable questions of people such as Fauci and who disagree with the official narrative, whatever that official narrative is, while she does nothing but solidify it. She plays the victim. Poor me, look at how they are coming after me, as she has repeated in one interview after another. You know, I had my own brief experience with her and what a little victim she plays. So basically what had happened was that she was banging on Twitter as usual. And I just tweeted her, asking her when she was going to look at the BBC's own Disinformation. She immediately blocked me. And then within hours, I received a communication from her boss, Mike Gwendolyn, who emailed me, white knighting for her, wanting a private conversation, saying, please don't make this public. Well, of course, the first thing I did was make it public. I'm not going to have some BBC asset tell me to keep some conversation private. I am completely opposed to the way they operate, right? Completely opposed, right? To me, as an experienced journalist, it is absolutely clear what Mike Gwendolyn's position is, what his role is, and what Mariana Spring's role is, right? It's this. If you ask questions of the official narrative, whatever that official narrative is, you are the problem, and you must be highlighted and demonized, as she did recently with the editor of the Light newspaper, Darren Nesbitt. Now, I knew Darren years ago when I was on Facebook. He's a decent man who has been able to reveal what a duplicitous and dangerous individual Spring really is. Check out this video.
From the question, I think you were going to present it as the Light paper has incited violence.
No, I think the thing that I'm interested in, which I was asking, is, there are, I don't want to repeat the interview again, but obviously we've talked about a whole range of different things. So, we're not just going to focus on one particular thing. We'll focus on various things that we chatted about.
It was great for Steve to catch that. He knew exactly what they were going to do. So to actually have her on camera say, no, we're going to provide a balanced and fair view, and then obviously just come out with just pure propaganda hit piece. But the problem is, if you don't present a balance or a fair view, or if you go over the top one way or another, either way, people, it doesn't ring true. It doesn't sound like we've benefited. I've just had the displeasure, and no thanks to you, Mariana Spring, of having to write out or copy across 311 new subscriptions last month. It's normally about 100 for the whole month, so she's tripled it. Like I said, because she's pushed so far the other way, it's made people go, well, what is this Light paper, and how bad can it be? How violent can it be if it's called the Light?
Truly, she supports everything unthinking and what bought journalists support. For example, she bangs on about climate change. She says there are no issues with the official narrative of 9/11. She targets and goes after people who question the jab narrative. Absolutely no one can make me believe that Mariana Spring is responsible for the direction of her content. She is a puppet and she has handlers. Her job is to highlight and make it happen. Now, let's look at the spy connections that many people have talked about regarding Mariana Spring.
This is the HQ of the British Secret Services.
Max Blumenthal, editor of The Grey Zone, an anti-war publication, has done some really interesting digging regarding BBC and their employees. For example, former Newsnight journalist, yes, another one from Newsnight, Paul Mason, has had leaked emails which show his establishment involvement and which Mason considered Mariana Spring as trustworthy and a safe pair of hands. Now, I'm no fan of Paul Mason, but he is an experienced journalist. So why he would be recommending Mariana Spring, who is barely out of her journalistic romper suit, is intriguing. The grey zone is quite clear that both Mason and Spring are to be watched closely from an intelligence perspective. See, the notion that Spring is where she is because she's a spy is not as far-fetched or implausible as it may sound. She attended Pembroke College, one of the colleges at Oxford University. In British terms, she's a former attendee of Oxbridge, which is the name given to people who attended two of our most apparently prestigious universities, which is Oxford and Cambridge. Now, to be clear, it's not unusual for journalists to come through the Oxbridge route. Sadly, there is an overabundance of Oxbridge journalists, which is why British media is just so horribly distorted, and that's away from it being like thoroughly compromised and sold out. But no, so the thing is, what marks Mariana out is the fact that with so little experience, she was given such a huge role. So let's just have a quick look at Oxbridge and its role in the intelligence services. MI6, right, which covers overseas secret services, military intelligence 6. Of the 12 MI6 chiefs since 1956, 9 of them were former attendees of Oxbridge. These included Colin Figures, Christopher Kirwan, Colin McCall, and Richard Dearlove. And what about MI5, which covers intelligence in the UK? Of the 13 Director Generals of MI5 from 1953, 10 were at Oxbridge, including Stephen Lander, Eliza Manningham Buller, and the current Director General, Andrew Parker. Is Mariana Spring a spook? She has all the credentials. And what about this BBC Verify service, the BBC's new fact-checking service? According to the CEO of BBC News, Deborah Turnus, this is what has been needed for a very long time. Now, Deborah Turnus, up until last year, was the head of ITN when I worked there. She also worked at 5 News, as did I. I never met her. ITN is a hugely successful news organization that supplies news shows to most of the terrestrial TV in the UK. I was a freelance contributing editor for 8 years for ITN, but left following my very public denouncements of how media was compromised around the C-19 narrative. ITN recently filmed a man for a news clip and told us he was a mum. Gaslighting much? I digress. But that would give you an idea of the type of company that Deborah lorded over for a very long time. Her influence is all over that decision. Go woke, go broke, as they say. Also, it should be noted that Turnus' second husband, John Toker, is the former director of communication for security and intelligence at the government's cabinet office. I mean, I don't even know what to say at this point. I mean, it is a swinging door. We have known for a very, very long time that the security services are heavily and deeply involved with the BBC. In later years, they've tried to dismiss that involvement, saying, no, that only happened for a period of time back there, blah, 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 blah. Of course they would. But the reality is you only have to look at the output to see that the output of BBC is everything that the government wants it to be, right? It simply is. It's just outrageously so. So BBC Verify, right? They have all manner of different journalists overseeing it. And the idea is for them to show us the fact-checking process behind the BBC stories, as well as we've clearly seen, go after individuals and get their online presence destroyed, right? 60 journalists make up BBC Verify. And let me just quote some of the quotes here about it. one of the things that they've said is if you know how it's made, you can trust what it says. And that, according to Deborah, is what the audiences have told them. Trust is earned and transparency will help us earn it. Nobody trusts the BBC, right? You've got to understand that. The BBC is now really only trusted by, as I say, the people who haven't yet learnt the discernment that they needed to. And it's shocking. It's not to be trusted. So look, I think this is interesting. The Mariana Springs name, right? Even her name sounds light and bright. Spring. It's not Mariana Winter, is it? Or Mariana Cold. You know, it's the season that denotes the start of new beginnings, of better times. Then the other thing that I take real issue with is that she barely started working as this disinformation reporter when all of a sudden there was this auction going on for the rights of her book, which is shocking, right? So she signed a book deal in 2021, just a year after she'd taken up this major role. And her book, which is due to be released in autumn 2023 by Atlantic Books, is titled Among the Trolls, Notes from the Disinformation Wars. Now, the BBC claims to be this fantastically impartial organisation. But the reality is Mariana Spring has used her role at the BBC to create a narrative about people, which then financially benefits her because she's able to write about it. I mean, I find that astonishing, right? That's a compromised book. She's a compromised BBC asset with a vested interest. So the fact is, Mariana Spring came from nowhere, landed somewhere, and now she's everywhere. It is absolutely feasible that she is an agent working against the interests of the people. Certainly, that is what her output would suggest. Her entire backstory supports this and is complementary with the type who are employed by the secret services. Oxbridge, reporting in Russia, quick entry into the BBC, and a huge role with apparently very little experience. We are looking at someone who has all the attributes of being an asset of the state. So yes, there is little doubt in my mind that BBC News and those it promotes to tackle disinformation are indeed our modern day Ministry of Truth run by liars.
At the end of the day, she's just one cog, you know, in a massive organisation, a massive wheel, that exists to defraud us of information, to obviously mould our beliefs. It's all about social engineering, and you know, having a massive slave farm without hardly any of the slaves knowing that they're the slaves. It's Brave New World. It's Brave New World, and we're going towards it very, very quickly as well.